All right. So we're going to go ahead and get started so that we make use of the valuable time. Again, welcome to those that have just joined us for the first time. This is the third session in a four-part series, which will end next week. And we've had some pretty amazing conversation and discussion around this topic of leading with love. What does that mean? And how is that practical? How is it relevant to leaders, and how is it relevant in the business environment and in the greater society that we all are a part of? And so we're hoping to continue that discussion today. We have a very special guest with us today, Lybra Clemens, and she's going to guide us through a discussion specifically around diversity and inclusion, or diversity, equity, and inclusion. And what that means in terms of leaders' ability to tap into these characteristics that we largely classify as love. And how is it practical? What does it mean in the real sense? What does it mean in the corporate world and in most organizations? And so we're going to be able to dig a little deeper than we have in terms of our applicability in the way of practice. And so I'm very excited about that today. Briefly, again, this is brought to you by the Silicon Valley Executive Center at Santa Clara University. My name is Dennis Lanham. I lead that center and I head our non-degree executive ed programs at the university. And so we worked very hard to pull this together, and we think this conversation is critical and that it's timely. And so with that, I want to just give a couple of updates that we've been saying every week as reminders. We have actually enabled the cameras this time for the full session. So if you can, keep your cameras on. We think it's important to be able to actually look at each other as much as possible when we're having these very important conversations. So keep your camera on. And we do have everyone muted, obviously, to limit the audio issues and feedback, things like that. But we're asking that everybody utilize the chat function in this Zoom session. If you have questions or if you want to contribute to the conversation, we'll monitor that, and Lybra can use that at her discretion to enrich the conversation and to bring different points of view forward. So feel free to use the chat on that. And with that, I wanted to make sure that, again, we introduce our partner on this program. We're very proud to be partnering with Stage 4 Solutions. I'm going to turn it over to the president and CEO of that organization, Nidhi Agrawal, for an introduction. And after that, I'll introduce Lybra and we'll get started. So Nidhi.
Yeah, thank you, Dennis. So welcome, everyone. I'm super excited to be partnering with Santa Clara University on this, this series of webinars. So just really quickly, I'm Nidhi Agrawal. As Dennis mentioned, I'm CEO of Stage 4 Solutions. We're a marketing consulting and interim staffing firm, and we support clients nationally to fill gaps in their teams. And one reason we're so excited to co-sponsor this event is when we're working with our leaders in Fortune 500 companies, we often hear about their leadership goals and challenges, especially right now as times are so tough. And so we're excited to bring this conversation to the forefront to help leaders support and value their teams, but also achieve their business goals. So we're looking forward to learning from Lybra today. Thank you so much for the opportunity. Back to you, Dennis.
Thank you so much, Nidhi. And again, thank you so much for the partnership. We think that this is, again, critical conversation. It's timely. And we're going to do some learning today. Lybra has an amazing background and has built quite the career as a thought leader in diversity and inclusion, or now known as diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so I think she's going to give some history, but she's also going to talk about, from a practical standpoint, what are some various scenarios that maybe she's dealt with in her own experience, having built such a profound career in this space. And I think there's a lot of learning that can come both from her, but also from each other as peers. Lybra has, again, an extensive background in the space. She was Chief Diversity Officer and led diversity and inclusion for a variety of organizations, most recently PayPal, but also Amex and several other large corporate organizations, and really has been sort of around since the birth of diversity and inclusion, and has been instrumental in sort of building out that space. And we're all living in a time where we all recognize that it's extremely important. And quite frankly, I personally believe that it is an act of love, and to some extent. And so that's the reason why I asked Lybra to be a part of this, and she generously agreed to lead the conversation. So Lybra, thank you. and I'm turning it over to you now.
Thanks a lot. Really appreciate it. I'm excited to be on this call. And more importantly, I think this idea and concept of love in the workplace is something that was new to me, but also it ties so nicely into how we as a country and the world right now is evolving into better leaders. I think one of the best things that could have happened to us right now is what is happening in 2020. I'm not saying that I'm excited about people losing their lives because of a pandemic or people making bad decisions to continue this pandemic, but I also am so incredibly disgusted and frustrated by the useless killings of Black men and Black people, which had been going on for years, but now we're videotaping it and people can finally see it. And now the world is taking a look at some of the racial tensions that have plagued this country for many, many years. But how it is played out in corporate America, I could have never dreamt of even this could have been an issue. I mean, I've been in the diversity space, as Dennis said, for 15 plus years when it wasn't even a thing and people were kind of like, what is it? I was like embarrassed to tell people at parties what my job was and people didn't know it. And it was so hard to get a lot of people, while there were companies out there, especially East Coast financial services companies that had a focus on diversity and inclusion. There were still those industries that were really try to really understand the purpose behind having a function that focused on it. And originally the focus was on recruiting, nothing else. And so where we are right now from where we were before is the saddest and the most amazing time, because everybody's now kind of taking a look in the mirror, whether we agree with how they approach it or not, and kind of digging deep into who they really are and trying to assess what that means as you engage with your peers, engage with your colleagues, how you run your teams, all of that. And so one of the things I wanted to do was I haven't prepared much, but I really just wanted to take the time to give you all a little bit of history behind where diversity was and where it is right now, beyond just kind of painting the picture, and then just talk through a few scenarios and talk through really important key components of what it means to be an inclusive leader, which ties back to what it means to lead from the heart and really think about how to lead with love. And so, as I mentioned to you, diversity and inclusion has been around for actually longer than I've been in the space. A lot of the financial services companies, some law firms recognized that there were some, obviously some discrepancies around the number of, at the time, and it's still a huge focus on women. And so in the mid 90s, late 90s, there were a lot of companies that were actually being sued by women who felt like they were not being paid the same, who felt like they were not getting access to the various roles. This is clearly before you had a BlackBerry, much less a phone, or you could take computers home. So women who were actually trying to balance families, and I'm saying women because we're talking about women at the time before there was a conversation around same-sex partner or partnerships and marriage. Women were actually struggling with how to maintain their careers in whatever industry and also maintain a family. So oftentimes there were conversations around, oh, she's on the baby track, or, if that's the choice, or, well, she's on maternity leave, so we recognize now that she has 2 kids, she can no longer stay late and engage and go to the golf clubs and so forth. And so a bunch of women just like, yeah, this is not happening. So there were several class action lawsuits against various companies where they felt like women were actually not getting on deals, not getting in opportunities. I'm so sure when it came to tenure in the academic sector, people were just like, this is an unfair advantage. So that is when diversity and inclusion, at the time, there was no equity conversation, kind of popped up, where they were, and it was normally born out of compliance or legal. So there would be a diversity person or an employee relations person that was deemed with ensuring that women had a space to have the conversations. And it started to be a conversation around what policies need to be in place to ensure that women who do come back from leave, or women who actually want to take time off and have children. And we're talking about, you know, women of means who actually could do that and stay home for a year or two, can come back and still be able to hold down workload and be considered for opportunities. And so it evolved from there. And I think in the, I would say in the early 2000s, when I got started into the diversity space, there was a book by who I call the grandmother of diversity. Her name is Ella Bell. Dr. Ella Bell, she's actually a professor at Dartmouth's Tuck School of Business. She wrote a book called Our Separate Ways. And the book was so brilliant. It was the first of its kind, and she actually just got it re-released because sadly, it's even more relevant today. She interviewed Black corporate women and white corporate women, and she compared the career trajectories of white corporate women and Black corporate women, and how different they were. And she was doing it under the guise of women need to support one another. But during that movement of when these women were coming together and suing these companies, they were white women. White women could do that. White women had the means. White women could actually take time out of the, you know, out of their career paths, the majority of them, and actually take some time out and go have babies and come back and figure out how to make, you know, and come back to work. And so what she was trying to show was that there are huge discrepancies in how Black women in the workplace were treated versus white women. And so to me, in that, I think it was 2002 was the book was published, and it's, like I said, it's actually re-released, being re-released. That is when I started my diversity journey, because it was the first time people were talking about intersectionality. And yes, we know intersectionality has been around for a long time. And yes, we know there has been enough of conversations around intersectionality, but it was the first time that it was discussed in the corporate sector. And so from there, the conversations got very rich. You were talking about Black issues, you were talking about Hispanic issues, you were talking about Asian issues, you were talking about LGBT issues. Then companies started to think about, you know, just benefits for partners, same-sex partners. I remember at American Express actually drafting a transgender policy. That didn't exist in a lot of companies. And so it really started to think about, how do we continue to evolve the conversations around ethnicity, orientation, veteran status, people with disabilities, all of the things that were non-white, hetero males. And so as we started to think about this, this is kind of the evolution of how diversity started to be where it is right now. So there were conversations about it. And again, a lot of people don't understand that the diversity conversations were not like we're sitting in a room and we're having all this training on unconscious bias. No, old school diversity, which I am, was around your systems. So looking at all the bias that happens in your recruiting. While you can have a diverse slate and roll out a version of a Rooney Rule, which is to ensure there's a diverse slate of candidates and diverse interview panel, it doesn't mean that that diverse person is going to be chosen. And so there was all kinds of bias in those systems. And so the diversity person was there to actually figure out how to close that gap and interrupt those biases and interrupt those behaviors. The same thing with the talent review process. You know, if you're an employee and every year or twice a year at a company, no matter where you work, you're supposed to get a performance review. Who's doing your performance review? People in power. Who are the natural people in power? White males. So what are they doing? They're reviewing me based on their lens. not even considering what's happening in my life, whether I have children, what it's like to be Black, all of that. They're reviewing me with their lens. And so the chances of me being up to speed, or chances of me actually meeting their criteria, the chances of me actually getting to that next level were small. So the diversity person in the HR team has to figure out, how do you interrupt those performance management processes that are not in favor of supporting others? And then you have the whole engagement piece. Like, how are people feeling at work? They call it belonging. I literally cringe. I hate that word. Sorry, I know people love it, but I hate it. But anyway, it's engagement, the culture. How do I feel every day at work? And do I feel like I have a place to go when I'm having a bad day, or where I feel like something just wasn't right or wasn't in my favor? Do people really recognize that I'm actually wanting to have children, or don't have children, or want to do whatever? Do they recognize what it's like when every other day I look at CNN and somebody is being murdered that looks like me? And so that is the kind of the evolution of what is happening with the function of diversity and inclusion. So you're looking at the systems, trying to figure out how you change behaviors by leaders who are of the dominant group, doing what you can to get more people that are diverse people, and I use that word as an adjective, who are non-white hetero males, into leadership positions, so that everybody starts to see a shift in the culture and how people are recruited, how they're evaluated, how they are advanced, and how they feel at work. So one of the things I want to do, and I know we have a breakout coming up, is how does that tie back to love, and how does that tie back to leadership? It's not enough to just come in and be like, hey, I'm going to change your recruiting. I'm going to work on your performance management. You have to have influence. You have to have position. You have to have authority, and you have to know diversity. And so what is shifting now is the role of the chief diversity officer. I don't know if you all have followed this, especially in corporate America, but everybody and their mama is looking for a head of diversity. Everybody, every company, organization, nonprofit, education, everybody's looking for a head of diversity. The other thing is, a lot of these companies are recognizing that your head of diversity cannot report into someone that reports into someone that reports into someone else. The most effective person needs to have access to the C-suite, because you are influencing all the decisions that are actually being made. So for example, if you're acquiring a company, the diversity person needs to understand what that means. If you're acquiring a company for a tech company, and the company is filled with a whole bunch of white men, number one, you're screwing up the diversity numbers. Number two, how do you know they're going to fit into what's going to happen into, like, is their culture going to fit with our culture? And so there's a lot that's happening and shifting in terms of how you position your head of diversity, what their role is, what the understanding is. But more importantly, it's tied to leadership. And you can have the best head of diversity on the planet, but if your leadership does not fall in line and actually align with values and principles that are derived from love in the heart, you're not doing anything. And you can tell, I don't know if anyone's done some research, and please do, the average tenure of a diversity person at certain companies is 2 to 3 years. So what does it mean for everybody here? Well, one of the things as a leader, and I use that word liberally, I use it because I think all of us are leaders to some extent. We may not be a CEO or CFO, but I think everybody's a leader, and it eventually will lead a team or lead your family. I always go by these 4 C's of being an inclusive leader, which to me is derived from love. And this is how I advise all leaders and CEOs and presidents to actually approach situation. And these 4 C's are being committed, being courageous, being connected, and being curious. I'll say them again. Being committed, being courageous, being connected, and being curious. So I'm going to talk through a little bit about what those mean. And then we're going to work through some scenarios and go off in our breakouts to talk about how you use those 4 C's to manage any situation, whether it's diversity related or not. And everybody works with people that are different from them, different values, different understandings, different ideas. But in order for you to actually be a solid leader, you need to leverage all 4 C's in order for you to start to open yourself up and lead from the heart. So let's start with committed. Committed is one of those C's where when we're thinking about commitment, is when you have a team or an organization or students or family that you as your ideal leader self is 100% committed to the team, that you are committed. People used to say all the time, what's your number 1 priority? Every day, and anybody that works for me or with me knows that I literally ride or die for my team. My team is a priority. I am 100% committed, because if I'm not committed to them, it doesn't work. If I'm not committed to my family, it doesn't work. I am 100% committed to their health, their well-being. I may not always like them, I may not always agree with them, but I am 100% committed. Because when you are not, you start to break down the chain, and you can't do anything efficiently without having that commitment to this particular group that you're leading. The second thing, when you're talking about courageous, when you're being courageous, that's an interesting one, because everybody is faced with a dilemma on a regular basis, even at work, at home. And so when you know in your heart that something is right, but everybody else doesn't agree, how courageous are you to step up? This is a hard one, I think, especially in the workplace, because it may not always be, there's a lot of this thing called disagree and commit. I'm not a fan. I do believe that at some point you have to go along with the team if you're kind of like, I'm on the fence, but okay. But when it is to the detriment of a situation, especially impacting a diverse group of people, you have to be courageous to actually step up. And it's not enough to say, I don't agree, but it's courageous enough to say, I don't agree, and let's talk why. And to dig a little deeper, step up, be the person that's like, this is not right, this is wrong, I'm advocating for this person. You didn't consider that. There has to be courage to step up and step out when you see any injustice happening. The third one is connected. This one I love because a lot of this to me is a lot harder than people think. Everyone talks about this idea that of this proximity, meaning a lot of leaders use that as a concept of proximity. And Just Mercy, I don't know if you all have read the book or seen the movie, but Brian Stevenson is an author who is written a lot around racial injustice, especially in the prison systems. And he talks about this concept of proximity. And what I think a lot of people miss, whether you're in the majority population or not, is you can't have any understanding or empathy for a group you don't know. And so in order to do that, you need to have proximity. And it's not for majority people, it's for all people. And I think that to me is the connected piece. And yes, I understand that a lot of people are like, oh my God, now I got to find a Black friend or a Black person now that we've seen George Floyd. No, that's not what we're talking about. It's doing the work, doing what you need to do to understand and stay connected to that community, to really understand. I'll give you an example. I don't know much about veterans. The veterans population is a underrepresented group. They are a diverse group, especially in corporations, but I don't know anything. I didn't know, I've never served in the military. No one in my family, well, people in my family have, but I'm not connected. And I did my homework. I did it. I joined the military ERG. I've read enough about it, really trying to understand what it means to be deployed away from the family. Whether I agree with the choices are irrelevant, but I needed to really understand what it means to be connected to that group so that I have not only empathy, but a full understanding of what it means, so that I am not making my own or passing judgment and making my own ideas about this particular group. And that's what leads to ignorance, which ties nicely to curiosity. And that's the last C, is curious. It's hard, but when I don't get it, and this is what I'm learning in my coaching as someone who's coaching me to be a better leader, is all leaders need to be curious. Thank you for putting this in the chat. Curiosity is so critical, especially when you don't agree and you don't understand. And not curiosity in an offensive way, but asking more questions, trying to really understand and have empathy and love for that other person so you can be curious and really think about, okay, so explain to me a little bit about why you are not for immigration. I'm making that up. I need to understand it. And in a very soft and really intentional and authentic way of being curious, as opposed to being offensive about it. Because you learn a lot about that person. Again, you don't always have to agree. My thing is, you don't have to agree, just respect. And I think when you're curious, you're naturally curious. That means that you're not doing it just to get someone to support or to join your side. You're curious to understand and getting to know that person. And you're saying, hey, you know what? I respect you. I just want to understand a little bit more. So one of the things I want to do in the breakout is we're going to break out in groups. And I am thinking about a scenario that maybe I can give you all a scenario. If someone has a scenario to put in the chat box, but what we'll do in the breakout sessions for about 15, 20 minutes is to each person, if they have time, to go through the 4 C's before you actually start to make a decision or jump on the bandwagon. Go through the process of evaluating yourself and going through the 4 C's before you actually come and draw a conclusion. So is there, in the chat, before I give you one, because I got to think of one off the top of my head, is there a scenario that we could actually leverage for this exercise if someone wants to put something in the chat? If not, I think I have one. All right, I think I have one. It's kind of relevant. I think most of you all know, and I asked Dennis if I could talk about this yesterday. Most of you all know what happened on campus, or what was it, last week or 2 weeks ago, with the Black professor whose brother was visiting her on campus and was, I'm using my words, questioned by the police. And the questions, and this happens on a regular basis, by the way, but the questions, I'm not going to say harassed, but I think will probably go as strong as harassment. But with this understanding or this idea that he didn't belong on campus because this officer had not seen someone like that on the campus. And so one of the things that I find to be, and I understand everybody was up in arms, and by the way, working in corporate America, every day, this stuff happens every day. But what I have to do as a leader is to take a step back and go through the 4 C's. And what I like about this different scenario is the 4 C's from the perspective of an outsider looking at both sides, because law enforcement has one side, whether you agree with it or not, and this young man has his side. So as you are thinking about, because these scenarios happen, whether it's exactly like this or some version, on a regular basis. And if you are leading a team, how do you manage that without getting upset or jumping on top of everybody? You can still have your opinion. But I think one of the things that's really important is, how do you assess this situation using the 4 C's from the perspective of law enforcement as well as the young man? Are we all set on this? Hold on just one second. I got another one. Dennis wants to say how to deal with the advancement of Black employees with companies that have incentive promotion structures that are driven by peer feedback, with companies that have very little representation on their employee ranks. That's a good scenario. Dennis, that's a whole other hour. That's strategy. That's strategy. And I think that, you know, if there's something Dennis, if there's something you want to pull out of that, where there is a situation, we can leverage the 4 C's, because what the 4 C's are is really how to be situational. What you're asking for is more of a strategy, and so the 1, 2, 3s. This is more of, how do you, as a leader, an inclusive leader, and lead with love, approach a specific incident or problem or issue. Does anyone else? Yeah, does anyone else have anything? Or we'll just go with the law enforcement versus the young Black man and looking at the 4 C's. All right. So I'm going to hand it over, and we're going to go out in these breakout rooms and come back in about 15.
Welcome back. I know that wasn't a lot of time. We're always pressed for time in 1 hour constraints like this, but hopefully you had some great conversation. I think Lybra presented a great model for us to think about what we've been talking about over the last several minutes. For the last remaining about 8 minutes or so, we're going to have you all raise your hand if you're willing to talk a little bit about what came out of your small breakout room discussion, and just sort of give us some insights, and then we'll have Lybra respond to those. We'd probably be able to get to 2 or 3 because we just have a few minutes left in the session. So if you'd like to talk, just raise your hand and we will unmute you, and then we'll get that perspective in that conversation that you had. So feel free to raise your hand now. Not seeing anybody just yet.
Is Judy, you said definitely not enough time. Judy, would you like to share? I hate to just call on people.
I'll unmute now, Judy.
Hello, everyone. Yes, so we had a very compelling conversation. I was with Thane and Karen and Stephen, and we really got into a great discussion. We really got into a great discussion just trying to unpack all of these things. Both Stephen and I actually worked together, and we weren't familiar with the situation or what happened, so just trying to understand the perspective of the school and the young man that was questioned, and how that must have felt, and the response from the school. Thane made a good point that maybe it wasn't enough in their commitment to saying, we are an anti-racial school, we are committed to this, and we are looking into this. Instead, it was more of a tactical ops perspective that will investigate this. And I think the consensus among our group was that wasn't enough of a commitment and didn't feel true love and leadership. And Thane, please jump in if I'm not recapping that so eloquently as you did earlier. And to me, it was more a question of courageousness, and how do the other professors and staff see that, and was that an opportunity for any of the other staff members or members of the Santa Clara community to step up and say, this wasn't enough, this investigation wasn't enough, I don't feel that this was right because of X, Y, and Z, and really asking those questions. And to me, this example brought forth the opportunity to ask yourself those questions and step up, like, what would I do? And, if I'm being honest, I would probably say it to myself. I would probably say it to my friends and be like, this is wrong. That wasn't okay. Have a discussion among a group. But what's the next level? Would I have gone to the dean or any executive leader and actually say that? And so I think that's a question that I'm getting from this, like, what would I do in that situation?
I think you summed it up so beautifully. I mean, I think we're often in these situations where how far do you go? What is that next level? Mm-hmm. And I think that it's the courage is the part that's really hard. I think that's it, where, you, like you said, most people would have a conversation. I know I had a conversation with friends about it, but I didn't do much after that. And so when you're leading a team and you're seeing these things play out on a regular basis, if more of us were courageous, how do you change the culture? And what happens is, if everybody is a little afraid, and I get it, there's, and I'm not going to say complacency, because I think that implies that you don't care. But if everybody is like, well, I did, we talked about it, maybe I'll send a note, but then the note never goes out, then people don't move forward. And so you do have to, I think Thane's point was, part of leading with love is having the courage to see where we are imperfect and committing to being better. Whether that's being anti-racist, maybe it's being pro-supportive of something where you feel like something's wrong. You see something, say something. But it is hard. Judy, I get it. So it's just a practice that we have to constantly practice these 4 C's, because you're not going to get it the first time. And you recognize, when you see that you do take that action and you become courageous and curious and connected and all of that, you see the impact. And then you'll start to see the collective impact, which will ultimately shift the conversation. Because we wouldn't be in this right now had some other people sat by and was like, man, why did they put that knee on the guy's neck? Oh, he died? Okay. You know what I mean? But then more people were like, wait a minute, this is crazy, and here we are now. I don't know if, Thane, you want to say something, or Mike, I saw in the chat. Feel free to jump in. We only have a few more minutes.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things, if it's okay, Dennis, one of the things, since Santa Clara is a Jesuit university, that St. Ignatius said is that we should judge a man or a woman more by deeds than words. And so, yeah, see something, say something. But I think if we really want to lead to a more just society, we have to take action. We have to do things to show what our beliefs are and to change the world and to end structural racism and other forms of discrimination. So thank you, Lybra. I love your framework. Thank you for being part of this. It's just really important and powerful framework.
Lori, I also saw that you said that you all had a really good breakout discussion. I'm curious, would you mind also giving us sort of a synopsis of what you talked about?
Yeah, it was just a really good time for us to, I guess, bringing up the importance of curiosity and the connection. That was really what resonated with me, and our conversation was really strong about the fact that we can't make those decisions right off the bat, that we lose the curiosity when we read something, and that we sort of close ourselves off to maybe the whole situation and the whole story. We may still come back to the same conclusion that we had a natural bent towards, which was that was wrong. But if we give ourselves space, that's going to connect us to everyone involved in a situation, and then really build on our curiosity, our willingness to have more conversations around it, and to Libra's point, do something about it, and be better prepared to stand up for what we believe. Saying something, we'll be better prepared for those conversations when we create a little bit of space at the beginning to really take something in, instead of making a quick judgment on any situation. And in this situation, we all basically felt the same way about it, but our conversation centered around how in all of these kinds of situations, we want to take that moment to make sure that we are practicing those 4 C's, and that creates space for growth and more connection with others.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Gail had one. I think she can close it out. I think she raised her hand.
Awesome. Yeah, I think we just unmuted you. There we go.
So our group looked at this also, and to the 4 C's, it was Carrie, Kim, and I. And so Carrie pointed out that the law enforcement, this situation, we looked at it as it's a repeated situation over and over, that the staff of Santa Clara should be immediately moving in and trying to be committed and courageous, and have their law enforcement understand that there's 2 duties, the protect and the serve. And we made the distinction that if someone that looked like me, I'm a Santa Clara alumni, I've been on the campus, that officer would have approached me and said, can I help you find something? How may I help you? That their law enforcement, or whoever these campus security are, need to approach everybody from that standpoint. And unpacking what we were talking about was acknowledging that if there is a fear about an individual based on appearance, that needs to be looked at and have an understanding of where that's from, and working on dismantling that's not how you act. You need to take that moment and pause. So we were looking for ways of how we put the committed, courageous, connected, curious into action in our training as leaders, of how we implement that among everybody on campus. And that's, of course, treating everybody with respect.
Mm-hmm. I know we are right at the top of the hour, and we've done this now. Apparently next time we do the series, we need to maybe add another half hour. But I did want to close it out with a final thought from Lybra. And Brian Adams asked a great question, Lybra. Maybe this is how we can close it. A simple question. What is it that gives you hope?
Oh, wait, unmute myself. Can you hear me?
There you
Yeah,
go.
I mean, I have hope now that there is a movement where people are seeing these injustices, and that people are, you're on one side or the other side. I'm hopeful that people are now taking this seriously and questioning their motives. It gives me hope that more and more whites in America are understanding and owning their privilege and doing something about it, and being more active as opposed to pointing fingers and expecting others to do it. I have a lot of hope. I'm also, I believe in God, and I go to church, and I'm a Christian. And so I have a lot of faith and hope, and that always, no matter what, keeps me going.
Mm-hmm.
So,
awesome.
Yeah.
So first, I want to thank Lybra so much for your time, Lybra. This has been just an amazing conversation, and there's only so much we can pack into 60 minutes. But I think we at the very least, we've started some conversations that now we can take back to our own colleagues, our own teams, and our own organizations to continue. So thank you for presenting the framework, and thank you for being so generous with your time. Again, this has been brought to you by the Silicon Valley Executive Center at Santa Clara University in partnership with Stage 4 Solutions. Thank you all again for attending. We have one final session at the same time next week, so feel free to join us for that. And with that, like we said that I get from Jim Kouzes last week, love them and lead them. Take care.